Good morning again, Art History 2 from Egypt. Welcome inside of an Egyptian tomb. Wave hi to my friend who doesn't move very often back there, Talib. Hello, Talib. How are you? I hope that you are doing very well as we continue on our journey in Art History 1. This is the second half of our Egyptian lecture where we're going to be dealing with some of the arts that have to do with death. In fact, most of the arts have to do with death, power, religion. They kind of come together in ancient Egypt. But to get us kicked off, I thought I'd show you a quick fun video because many of you have actually seen the movie The Mummy from the late 1990s with Brendan Fraser, but some of the things that are just wrong with that movie. So this is something that you'll be doing later on today. This is what I do for Disney. It's called cultural consultation, and they actually pay pretty well. And so what you get to do is you become a master of a particular culture or an expert in a particular culture, and you go in and you critique three things. You critique what did they do well, what did they do not very well but it's not offensive, and what did they do that would actually be offensive or historically problematic from that time period. So here we go as someone actually breaks it down on how we do these things in the movies.
Movie supports the fact that the ancient Egyptians were skilled in the art of building.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to go back to that.
Great cities out of terrible CGI. Thebes, city of the living. Thebes is a real ancient city in Egypt, but it doesn't sit in the direct shadow of the pyramids of Giza. There was, however, a city in front of the pyramids. It's called Giza. Also, narration. Home of Imhotep, keeper of the dead. Real-life Imhotep was a cool dude. He was an innovative architect and made some...
Remember, he's the first artist we know in human history. The pyramids of Djoser.
The public will only know him as the evil magic mummy with the giant mouth.
Birthplace of Anaxunamun.
Anaxunamun was a real person who was born around 1,000 years after Imhotep. If the movie's just going to make up characters from scratch, why does it have to be historically confusing by using real people's names? This would be like if people thousands of years from now made a movie where Leonardo da Vinci was a witch doctor secretly in love with Princess Diana. Maybe this is why no other man was allowed to touch her. It isn't a sex thing, they just don't want anyone messing up her body paint. Yeah, if her body paint is smeared, it must mean someone touched her. It couldn't mean she brushed up against something, or did it herself. And oddly enough, she doesn't even have that lie ready. Pharaoh confronts these two without bodyguards.
To resurrect Anaxunamun, Imhotep and his priests broke into her crypt and stole her body.
So Imhotep and his goons fled the crime scene without anyone suspecting he murdered the pharaoh and stole his mistress from her crypt without anyone stopping him. Man, security in Thebes was pretty Who was Bruce Almighty in appearance back in 1290 BC? Why does she look nearly alive after having her organs removed? And did they not mummify her?
Anaxunamun's soul had come back from the dead, but Pharaoh's bodyguards had followed Imhotep and stopped it before the ritual could be completed.
If Imhotep and his buds didn't ceremoniously slow walk in with the book, they could have completed this task before the guard showed up. All of Imhotep's priests were secured in these torture contraptions, yet for some reason he needs to be held down by 4 people. The key that unlocks Imhotep's sarcophagus also unlocks both books of death and life.
The Magi would never allow him to be released, for he would arise a walking disease, a plague upon mankind, an unholy flesh eater with the strength of ages.
Even if they thought there was no way he'd get out, why risk this? Couldn't they just torture and kill him normally without giving him a chance to come back as some kind of Superman?
For 3,000 years.
For 3,000 years, this narration continues. You just got promoted. This is the French Foreign Legion, and yet some American guy is second in command. Rip is allowed to shoot at these horsemen with no cover and receives no return fire. Also, a lot of the opposing side is using guns, but Brendan Fraser lucks out by getting all the ones who are swords only. And we've cornered the person we've identified as the main character of this film, so my God, take your time shooting him. Basically, all that this security system does is tell people they found the right place. We could kill him now, but let's make the desert decide this. Rachel Weisz isn't my librarian in this scene. As soon as the ladder goes perpendicular to the ground, the book Evie was just holding magically disappears. Also, Rachel Stiltskin, knocking over bookshelves like they're dominoes cliche.
Sons of the Pharaoh!
So we're going to skip through this to go to the Egyptian a little bit more.
This man uses Sons of Pharaohs and the First off, why was Jonathan allowed to run crazily into this room without Rick? Second off, it's pretty convenient that the book they needed was right next door to the place they needed to go next to stop the sacrifice. Imhotep is currently on some stairs watching this. Could easily be over right now, but sure, let's see if your henchmen can do the job. Were these guys mummified in a standing, ready for battle position like terracotta warriors without the hard outer shell? I have trouble imagining why that's necessary. Or if it's even possible.
Finish the inscription on the cover, idiots, then you can control them.
And until then, they work for Imhotep. It's a seniority thing. The movie inspires 75% of the Pirates of the Caribbean series. These mummies adhere to the henchmen will fight one at a time rule so rigorously, most of them are actually just standing and waiting their turn. This is the second time the mummy's girlfriend has experienced death by shadow. I figure whatever attack Imhotep is about to perform here, he could have done it to everyone in this room and ended this about 45 minutes ago. He's an asshole, not because he wants to rule the world and revive his dead girlfriend using Evelyn, but because he wasted our time.
I thought you said he was going to kill him.
Imhotep, of all people, should know that he's mortal now, so why does he approach Rick and the crew like he's still immortal? He saw his soul get dragged away by Santa a minute ago, so why is he being dumb about this? Yet another security system for this tomb. Again, I'm left wondering why it wasn't used in the first place, way back when they buried Imhotep in this city underground. The ancient Egyptians really f***ed up this keep Imhotep buried for everything. That stupid gold book was the whole reason any of this movie got started. The movie decided to just throw it away at the last second because you and sequels. This lowering ceiling doesn't know where it wants to be between these shots. As if the movie wasn't Raiders of the Lost Ark enough for you, this movie gives us one final stab at it before the credits. Everywhere Benny turns, another door is just closing at the last second, instead of already being closed, which is what they would be due to the synchronicity. These three rode out here on an airplane in a sand tornado. No one else was in the city as far as we know. So where the f*** did all these camels come from?
You have earned the respect and gratitude of me and my people.
Ardev forgot it was all their fault that Imhotep was revived in the first place.
Giving frogs, flies, locusts, anything but you.
So welcome to Art History 1. Actually, again, a review. Well, you'll see that the Hollywood film actually really does mess up Egypt very often. We're so concentrated on the mummies and the death for the horror that we basically overlook the rest of their culture and what could have been very good actually used, because there is the idea and there are myths of people coming back to life that kind of haunt individuals. Remember, they're 10 to 100 times more powerful, so they could really play off some of these things. Where we had left off last time is the following. I had given you this list on Egyptian art. So if you have not written down this list, you'll need it for today. Please write it down as I move around actually within the Egyptian tomb. So again, the concepts are death, politics, and religion, with death being the central focus. They're going to have more realistic body, low relief with composite pose like we saw in Mesopotamia. Men have beards. Women have, or men and women both have open, large eyes, but not ridiculous eyes like Mesopotamia. They're more normal, but still larger than usual. Hierarchical scale, largely for the gods. Their gods are going to be hybrids of animals and humans, like we see over here in the Book of the Dead, or the book that is actually with Anubis, the god right there. Men are going to be red, women are going to be yellow. So you can see in this particular Book of the Dead, we do have red. That's going to be a male. And then we have a couple females that are actually up here. So we'll see all of these features today. And so one of the things that shows up in ancient Egypt or in other cultures as well is, how do we evaluate an artwork? When we approach an artwork like this, how do we look at this? And so this is the palette of Narmer. This is one of the first Egyptian artworks of all time. And if you do not know, Narmer is the first pharaoh. His name weirdly means, when we translate it over from hieroglyphics, fish chisel. And that's actually what you see up here. There's a fish right up on top, followed by chisel. That's actually Narmer's name in Egyptian hieroglyphics. Note he's surrounded by gods that show up. And so I want to show you kind of the symbolic meanings as we look at this. So this is on fish chisel for Narmer. So Hathor, which is a cow god, is up there protecting the name, basically protecting Narmer. Narmer defeats the king of Lower Egypt here. That's what you're looking at here. And so he is the individual that's going to unify Upper and Lower Egypt. And that's why after Narmer, you're going to see basically both of these crowns are going to show up with that curly Q on the very top. Note, the white crown right here is only for that's for Upper Egypt, and he's conquering Lower Egypt within the process. So this is going to get combined in terms of later pharaohs that show up. You'll note the hierarchical scale with him being larger than everyone else, particularly his attendant, who's basically just holding his sandals. Remember, in art, people wearing sandals or up on a platform is about controlling their energy. The fact that he doesn't have any sandals on, going back to the Stele of Hammurabi, means his energy is out of control, and that's why he's able to win. This is a birth of an empire, basically, image, and you'll notice there are cosmetics that show up. The cosmetics would actually get placed right here, and they are the black lines we use in football and other sports to actually help absorb the light. It's a pictograph up the top of Narmer Fish Chisel. That's his name. Here are the fallen foes, all with their heads cut off. 4 men carry the various Egyptian staffs, and a serpent lion runs around, which really it does not appear in any other Egyptian art form. So this is an unusual feature for the Palette of Narmer. And finally, Hathor at the very bottom bowl is protecting the king from anyone who wants to uprise around it. And so this is basically a symbolic, or what we call iconographic language. Iconography is what particular symbols mean in a particular culture. For example, if we were to show the American flag, most of us would think about patriotism and about nationalism that comes up. If we were going to show you an image of money, we'd think about wealth and power within the United States. That's what we're looking at when we actually look at these various symbols called iconography. Now, the first artwork that we really want to spend some time on from ancient Egypt, besides the pyramids, remember, which are just storage units, are going to be this artwork, or it's going to be this artwork right here. This artwork I'll show you in the next slide. It's called Menkaure and his wife. His wife has an almost impossible name to pronounce, Kabernepti. Oh. So I move this there. And so what I want to know is, what features of ancient Egyptian art do you see here? Is this about politics, death, religion? More realistic body, composite pose, men have beards, wide open, large eyes, hieratic scale, gods hybrids. You'll know it has many of these features that show up. There's also, ironically, another style of art form that shows up in ancient Egypt. And so this is for the pharaoh style over here. Over here is for wealthy individuals. And so this is for the seated scribe. These would for people who are court attendants that are basically high-ranking government officials, not just for middle class, but very upper class. And note, it's a much more realistic feel versus a much more formula propaganda feel that shows up over here. So what is the message of this artwork? If we were to look at this particular artwork and do an aesthetic analysis, like we talked about within one of our last classes, what would be the message? What's the intellectual impact? Excuse me, what's the emotional impact? And how does the artist do this? And that's correct. The message of this is about imperial power, the emperor's power, and that the woman is actually the one providing support and love. And so the questions that we would have to answer and figure out for this Ka statue, this is a Ka statue, an ancestral spirit statue. So the pharaoh would be buried with this. It'd be large scale. It's about 5.5 feet tall. They would be somewhere between life size and just at life size. Because remember, hieratic scale means we're all roughly the same size, or hierarchical scale. Note the woman's almost the same height as the man. So the woman is the pharaoh. So really, this is an equivalent relationship. It is unusual for men to be and women to be together. We should answer the question why. The pharaoh's eyes look where? We should look at that. No, the pharaoh's eyes look past us. They're not looking at us. They're looking right over our head. And that's the way we tell, even today when politicians are on TV, they look just above. They don't look directly at the camera, at the eye. They look just above the camera. So they're looking past over the head of everyone. Why the limited clothing? It's a hot culture, as I talked about last time. 120 to 130 degrees. Why the Nemes headdress? That Nemes headdress represents a cobra. It's a protective kind of force for just protecting the pharaoh himself, but then the pharaoh being able to use that power to protect all of us. Who makes the physical contact? Here, clearly it's the woman. It's the pharaoh, or the pharaohess, who's literally Kabernepti, his wife, that is holding him. And if you look at the back of her arm, stretching around, it's very weird. Her arm would have to be almost 7 feet long in order to have that kind of loving, tenderly gesture up on his bicep and also on his midsection. What is being held? This is a challenge, and we'll see this. But in one hand, he's holding a metal rod. In the other hand, he's actually holding an ankh. And that metal rod, remember, when people hold metal rod, we saw this in Mesopotamian culture. It basically is a gift from the gods, showing that I have the power to rule. And the ankh, in the other hand, which I'll show you in a minute, is a symbol of eternity for them. So basically, the political message is, I have the power to rule forever. Why is it being held? For exactly that. He's got power from the gods forever. Remember, he is a living god as the pharaoh. When he dies, he's going to be a full-fledged god. And why on the pedestal? We saw that from ancient Mesopotamia as well. And that is largely because we want to make sure that he is separated from the ground because he's got so much extra energy in a hot desert climate. We don't want that extra energy going to the ground and causing us to have a drought. So as we look at this ancestral spirit, and all the pharaohs had them in their tombs, Luckily, this is one of the things that most appears in the tombs still today, because they're 5 feet tall, generally made of very heavy, hard to card stone. It's really hard to get these out of the tomb. So they took the gold, they took the trinkets, they took the ushapti, small attendant figures that would be their slaves in the afterworld or their servants in the afterworld. They took all of the jewelry, they took the mummies themselves. These are generally the things that are left. And ironically, this is one of the most important things in the tomb, because this is actually where the pharaoh's spirit could come back and live to protect and watch over Egypt. And let's face it, look at their history. 3,200 to 400 BCE, this worked for them for 2,800 years. The United States, we've only been around 200 years. So let's see what our artwork looks like 2,000 years later. Note the aspect of the equality. The men and the women are almost the same height here. Note the idea of eternal love, again, between a man and a woman. Now, Menkaure, the pharaoh here, if you remember that name, that is the smallest of the 3 pyramids at Giza. So that's where this was found, in that the one that was only 420 feet tall, a modern day 42-story building. He had the option of being buried with his wife or being buried on his own. Remember, he's 10 to 100 times more powerful. He could be a player in the afterworld. And he so loves this particular wife. He had many wives. Cabernepti is the one that gave birth to their first son. His pharaoh's eyes, as we mentioned, look over us and past us. So he's looking at everyone. His clothes are for heat, and they show the gender. We actually start to see the breast. The Nemi's headdress as a god protection. That's the Nemi's N-E-M-E-S. That's the cobra headdress. The wife makes the physical loving gesture. It's her job to protect him, to care for him, to make sure that he's safe, so he can do the same for all of us, all the Egyptians. Holds a metal rod from the gods and the Ankh for eternal life, and his feet on a pedestal to hold his energy, like we talked about before. So we can look at the iconography and how it all holds up as a symbol of power. Now, our first erotic love poetry that we have in world history is actually love poetry from a girl to a boy. We don't know if they were married, we don't know if they got married, but it does explain, if you really look at the tight-fitting clothing that shows up on the pharaohs here, Cabernepti, one of the things that shows up is you actually can see her breast, the outline of the pubic triangle. You can actually see her nipples. The clothing is so sheer, and here's where we get the reference to it. Love, how I'd love to slip down to the pond, bathe with you close by on the bank. Just for you, I'd wear my new Memphis swimsuit, made of sheer linen, fit for a queen. Note the reference here to the artwork next to us. Come see how it looks in the water. Couldn't I coax you in to wade in with me? Let the cool creep slowly around us. Then I dive deep down and come up dripping. A gift, love, no words. Come closer and look. It's all me. And basically, what is she doing and what's she offering here? It's a wet t-shirt contest from the modern day world. A much more loving gender, because it's not for public display. It's really only for her particular husband, the pharaoh, the living god. And in this particular one, of course, you would see the nipple in a wet t-shirt contest and all the breast. So it's censored for sexually exploited imagery that may harm other women. We want to have gender equality as much as we can here, rather than objectify a woman. But she's objectifying not necessarily herself, but the idea of showing love to her husband in this particular artwork, which, remember, would have been in his grave for all eternity, for him to look over and look at her beauty and continually fall in love with her. In his right hand, he actually holds an Ankh, that power hand that shows up. And the Ankh then, in here you actually see what the Ankh looks like. The Ankh has become the female shape in the modern day world, and so it represents women in the modern day world. Why would that be? That's correct, because women can give life. And as they give life, they're eternal. And so the Ankh symbol from ancient Egypt has become the female symbol of everlasting life today, even in our modern day world. The male symbol is going to come out of a bow and arrow that actually comes out of a symbol for Ares in the Greek and Roman world. There are different styles of Ka. And note, in almost all the different styles of Ka statue, their ancestral burial statue, they're almost always moving forward. You'll see different representations of how muscular individuals are, but no, they generally don't wear a lot of clothes. It's a very hot climate. They almost always have that nemes or variation on the headdress as seen in the middle. They range anywhere from 3 to about 5 feet tall. Most of them are in the 5 feet tall. Most of them are made of very expensive materials, overlaid with gold or a very tough rock. But note, very few of them have a woman or a wife attached. The man was a player. He had many wives So why choose one when in the afterworld, he's going to want and desire the same things that he had in this world? Why would you have a wife holding you down within that process if you're 10 to 100 times more powerful and a god? Now, what I'd like you to do is measure yourself in Egyptian fist body width. So for this, you're going to probably have to stand up. What I want you to do is, all of Egyptian art is based upon a grid system. The grid system is based upon what are called cubits and fist body scales. As the pharaoh is a living god, we are going to use his measurements as perfect. And because we don't have that, you're going to get to use your own fist width, this length here, the fist width, as the living god. So you, for the next 2 minutes, get to be a living god. So what I'd like you to do is measure your height. How many fist widths? 1, 2, 3, 4 are you? And you'll probably have to stand up in order to be able to do this and measure it all the way down. So if you take a moment and you measure your body all the way down, you will count actually the number of fist widths that show up. When you're come back to me, and I'll show you how they did it. Because in order to be an ancient Egyptian artist, you have to be a mathematician as well, as you can see from the right. They basically block everything out in a grid format, and everything is actually tied to the pharaoh's fist width. So when the pharaoh dies, oh my God, we no longer have a unit of measurement. Oh, but we have a new pharaoh. We get a different fist width that shows up. If the pharaoh is like Hatshepsut and a woman, it might actually be smaller than the male one, so you can actually see the difference. You're in the middle of an art project, all of a sudden you have to use a new fist width. The scale is going to be slightly off. So there's some weird artworks that show up in ancient Egypt where we think we have lost a pharaoh, and a new pharaoh comes to power that is potentially even a different family member or a different gender, because there's a couple different female pharaohs, and that's why the artwork looks strange. So if we look at it, here's what we see. The human body height is generally considered 18 the width of the pharaoh's fist. 18 of these. Whenever they want to show a human body, it's going to be 18 of these. You get 18, I get 18. Women, you are at 17. Why? Because you're about 4 inches smaller than a man. So it's not about men being more powerful. It's that men are generally taller than women by about 1 fist width, which is pretty accurate. Your head height, if you measure it, is 3 widths of the fifth. I must have a small brain because I'm only 2.5. So small brain Fraser. The head width is 2 times the width of the pharaohs. If you measure that, 1. I'm almost perfect, at least according to the Egyptian standards with that. The shoulder width is 5. I've done that before. I must have wide shoulders. I'm about 6, a little over 6 within that. The hip width is 3 widths of the pharaoh's fist. I'm a little on the heavier side, so I don't even want to measure that. That's not cool. But this actually gives us that composite pose that shows up. No, it's not based upon realism. It's based upon a stylistic of what perfection is. And the perfection is based upon this system as well as the pharaoh's fist width. So even if the pharaoh is heavy, he's still going to appear thin because his hip width is only 3 times the width of the pharaoh's fist. And yes, they have all of these, and I haven't put them up there for just decency. They do have a length. Women, if you measure your breasts, they have a length for female breasts, width and wide. So it's 1.5 long, 1 wide. And guys, of course, they have measured your member as well. And so the phallus or the penis length is 1. The unerect phallus is 1. Well, you very seldom see it in art. It's generally covered with some of the clothing, but limited clothing because the temperature is so hot. So the question we ask is, when we look at these things, these images today, are these fair comparisons? They are about power. They're about dominance. Now, these are ancestral spirits. We don't quite have that yet with Beyonce and Jay-Z. Both are alive. But it is interesting that they chose to pose in front of the Mona Lisa to show their power and their dynamics. Some of African-American power in the face of what traditionally has been a white power institution in museums. And before it was a museum, the Louvre, it used to be the palace for the French monarchy. It's where Napoleon used to live.
Artworks to change the world.
Thank you, Professor Snape, for introducing us to an artwork that has changed the world. Now, probably all of you know this, even before the class and the reading that you did or the video that you did, answering those 3 questions on why was it made, what's new and innovative, how does it impact the world. All of you knew a little bit about this artwork. This, of course, is a Book of the Dead. Now, the Egyptians do not call this the Book of the Dead because they don't die. They continue on. For them, This is actually the book of eternal life. And so whether your life is good or bad depends on how moral you were. Remember, this is radically different than in Mesopotamia, where if you were not a good person, you go to this hellish, terrible underworld place with dark and dank. But if you were a good person, you go to that same hellish type place where you eat dust and dirt and it's hot. And you can hear and talk to your friends and neighbors, but you can never see or physically embrace them because the darkness does not allow you to get close enough. Here we have also, if you'll note, we have the composite pose, the idea of the profile that we're so familiar with in ancient Egypt. The Mesopotamians, remember, are the ones who invented this composite pose. The Egyptians are going to borrow this. The other thing that we're going to see is that this is a version of those narrative registers. The narrative registers, though, they just don't have lines going up and down them. So what they've done is this is a different version that's called simultaneous narration. Simultaneous narration. SIMULTANEOUS. So simultaneous narration is a version of narrative registers. And basically you'll see the same character. Here we have our red individual. Note it's the same red individual and the same red individual over here. So rather than marking it from scenes, the scene just kind of continues across the screen as we see it here. Now, most of the Egyptian features that we've seen are here. Note the gods are up on platforms. So anytime you see people with power, these are in the afterlife with the Ankh, that symbol of eternal life, they're all up on a platform. The god Osiris is up on a platform. The one notable exception then is Anubis coming in. Not really on any platform here, but remember, this is the underworld, which is already very hot within an Egyptian context that shows up. So that's what the features of Egyptian art do we see within the process. So here's the story. Here we have Hunefer's judgment before Osiris with the Book of the Dead or the Book of Eternal Life, depending on if we want to use our English translation or the ancient Egyptian translation. And so this is basically showing you the upper level is the afterlife for moral people. And I have to show you what happens to terrible people or immoral people below. Here we have an individual, and clearly it's a male. His name is Hunefer, being led by Anubis, that jackal-headed god, to the weighing of souls. Now, if they're in this lower black version here, I want you to know them. If they're in this gray, don't worry, I will mention them. But you'll also need to know the blue that shows up here. So the gray gods, I don't necessarily need you to know in an introductory level art history class, but we do want to know the bottom ones down here. Those are the main gods that show up. So you'll note Anubis, who is the god of embalming and the god of kind of preparing you for the mummification in the process. He leads you in front of this monster figure Ammit. Now that monster figure Ammit translates directly as eater of the dead. Ammit means eater of the dead. And he basically is waiting to find out if you are good or if you're bad. Because when you come to weigh your soul, your ka gets put in this particular jar. And if it weighs more and is weighed down by the heaviness of the evil things that you've done, weighs more than the feather of truth. Remember we saw that feather of truth on the head of Mott in an earlier artwork from one of our videos last week. If it weighs more than that feather of truth, that's just a simple ostrich feather, long but very light, then Ammit is going to get to eat you for all of eternity. And Ammit is a terrifying creature for the Egyptian. He is their boogeyman, he's their horror film, he's their gargoyles from the medieval, he's their Satan from the modern day Christian world. He has the three most feared features in the three most feared animals combination in all of ancient Egypt. So he has the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion. It sounds not terrifying at all, but the butt of a hippo. So these three creatures kill more people in Africa outside of mosquitoes with malaria than any other animal. They're the feared creatures. So the crocodile, what happens if you are determined to be bad is every day at sunrise, the crocodile bites you right across the midsection. So you feel the teeth, the razor sharp teeth going into you, slowly moving around, but he doesn't hit any vital organs. And so you are sitting there literally being digested by a crocodile that's slowly gnawing in and you can't breathe because he's actually slowing down your breathing. When noon rolls around, the lion comes. But unlike a normal lion attack, they don't take out your jugular and you die almost instantaneously. What they're going to do, it's going to take its claws and slowly flay your skin alive in the 100 degrees. So when you sweat, you get all that salt water and open wounds while the crocodile is still eating you. and you're basically being tortured for 12 hours. Finally, at noon, the hippopotamus is going to come along, and even though you don't see his teeth here, they're going to grow out of the crocodile's mouth. It'll either sit on your head or it'll take his fang and jab you, and those eventually will puncture your heart, your ka spirit, which is in your heart, and you will die. You'll have 12 hours to recover. But remember, all of you have had that night's sleep where you know terrible things are going to happen for the next day. So you toss and you turn and you just have a terrible night's sleep within it. That's what you're going to do while you're waiting for Amit, because you're waiting basically for 6 a.m. for the entire thing to start for the entire rest of your life. So behave, or Amit, the evil people will get you. If you are very, very good and your feather of truth is very light and lighter than we actually have with the feather of truth, that means you were good. The god Thoth here writes down and records how good you were. Basically, like checking, like later on, we're going to see St. Peter at the pearly gates checking to see, hey, were you good or you're bad? That's where the tradition comes from. The hawk-eyed Horus god, who can fly around and see all the good and bad that people do, leads you then and you meet the god of death. Note the god of death is almost always depicted as green or very dark black. His name is Osiris. He's basically their Hades for later on, or Pluto from Roman culture. And note, he's floating around in this lake of natron, which is this radioactive water, which we'll talk about in a moment. He's standing in front of his two daughters, Isis and Nephthys. But note, he's wearing the the crown of both Upper and Lower Egypt, because like Narmer, he is actually a unifier of everywhere in Egypt. Then you get to go, if you are Hunefer, Osiris accepts you. He looks at the document to make sure everything is on the up and up, and you get accepted in the land of the afterworld. And in the land of the afterworld now, you are 10 to 100 times more powerful. You get to hang out with the gods. If LeBron James and Michael Jordan are there and you like basketball, you might be able to beat them at basketball. Because the question simply comes down to, is LeBron James 100 times better at basketball than me today? No, I can dribble a ball. I played some college ball. I am actually not bad at basketball. Is he 10 times better than me? Probably. So if I lived 10 times better than him, let's say I was more moral, no affairs, I was a good father, I did everything well, humanitarian work, I might be able to catch him and even be able to slam and dunk over LeBron. However, if LeBron uses his money for good and has a lot more of it, he's going to be maybe not just 10 times better than me, maybe he becomes 100 times better than me. And so it all depends on how good you lived your life. But think about how cool it is. I mean, from a Christian perspective, you could go and play basketball with Jesus. Or you go swimming with, actually, you probably can't go swimming with Jesus. You're probably walking on the water. Maybe you can do that too in the afterworld with the 10 to 100 times more power that you currently have. So here are some images of Amit. Remember, eater of the dead. Now, Amit has depending upon where we look, there's the very muscular version of him in the upper left-hand corner. But I want to show you, because one thing that we often make fun of is hippos. Here's a crocodile that got in the middle of a hippo pool. Hippos are actually the most feared animal in Africa. So these hippos are really just going to eat it. If you look at the bottom image, look at the lion that's coming to bottom a hippo. Now remember, a lion's a 500-pound creature. Watch how the hippo just tosses that damn lion around. Pharaohs, for sport, used to go hippo hunting. They would go out on a boat and try to kill a hippo. Hippos are violently aggressive. They can run 30 miles an hour. They can actually submerge themselves for 3 to 4 minutes without needing a breath. And so if you get caught and they have a foot-long tusk, that foot-long tusk, if that gets in you, you wonder for 3 minutes, there's no way you're surviving it. Now, one of the cool things about the Egyptian Book of the Dead is that everyone, or I should say all Egyptians, have it. We don't give it to the Jewish slaves. A, they don't want it. And B, why would we ever want to empower our slaves to show that if they lived a better life, they could be more powerful than their master, who might not have lived such a good life? So note on the very left, there are Poor Person's Book of the Dead, which are just scroll drawings, really, without any image, that's on very basic papyrus. Note, most of them have the same features, though. There's Amit waiting for the notion of whether the person is correct or not, for the judgment of the souls, which you see in the middle. There's the one in the middle, a colored version, and that one is about 4 feet long. And then there's the long version, or the more beautiful version of the one that we started to look at, which is about 13 feet long. The longest Book of the Dead ever recorded is about 700 feet long, so it's longer than a professional football field. and they're all about 18 inches tall to 20 inches tall, depending on how big the papyrus was. The smallest one we found is about 2 inches. It's a piece of scrap paper that looks like the kids, the very poor person, the kids almost drew out what they knew from the Book of the Dead. So it was really an amateur performance. But almost everyone that gets mummified, which is the majority of the population, this is actually what they get. Modern impacts of the Book of the Dead or the Book of Eternal Life. One of them is going to be the concept of blind justice. Oh. See if I can't move that there. Of blind justice that we have within our court system. And that literally is the weighing of souls right over here. It's blind because we're weighing it over the feather of truth. And so we're not sure what the weight is, but we know this is the determination of justice or not. That's why it actually shows up. This figure shows up on our U.S. Supreme Courts all across the nation. It's the symbol of blind justice. The Last Judgment, remember, this Book of the Eternal Life sets us up for the Christian, Muslim, monotheistic religions and Islam of the Last Judgment, that Christ will come back to actually judge us for our particular own sins, and so provide an afterlife for moral people. So that final judgment that we're talking about really is going to bleed into Christian, Jewish, and Muslim thought as well. So a review for the Egyptian Book of the Dead or Eternal Life. 95% of Egyptians own. It's the book of death or life. You are judged for your morality. It gives you a punishment for all eternity if you're evil, kind of like hell. It's based upon the ancestral spirit being so powerful. There are variations in quality because Donald Trump's Book of the Dead is going to be radically different than mine, going to be radically different than someone who's homeless. There's going to be a continuous narrative called simultaneous narration, and the color symbolism, red for male, yellow for female that we see. The rest of it's borrowed from Mesopotamia. And so I want to show you a Book of the Dead and an explanation of it.
Ani stands before a large golden scale, where the jackal-headed god Anubis is weighing his heart against a pure ostrich feather. Ani was a real person, a scribe from the Egyptian city of Thebes, who lived in the 13th century BCE. And depicted here is a scene from his Book of the Dead, a 78-foot papyrus scroll designed to help him attain immortality. Such funerary texts were originally written only for pharaohs, but with time, the Egyptians came to believe regular people could also reach the afterlife, if they succeeded in the passage. Ani's epic journey begins with his death. His body is mummified by a team of priests who remove every organ except the heart, the seat of emotion, memory, and intelligence. It's then stuffed with a salt called natron and wrapped in resin-soaked linen.
That's
In addition,
platform
the
Osiris
wrappings
was
are
sitting on.
woven with charms
natron
for protection and topped with a heart scarab amulet that will prove important later on. The goal of the 2-month process is to preserve Ani's body as an ideal form with which his spirit can eventually reunite. But first, that spirit must pass through the Duat, or underworld. This is a realm of vast caverns, lakes of fire, and magical gates, all guarded by fearsome beasts. Snakes, crocodiles, and half-human monstrosities with names like He Who Dances in Blood. To make things worse, Apep, the serpent god of destruction, lurks in the shadows, waiting to swallow Ani's soul. Fortunately, Ani is prepared with the magic contained within his Book of the Dead. Like other Egyptians who could afford it, Ani customized his scroll to include the particular spells, prayers, and codes he thought his spirit might need. Equipped with this arsenal, our hero traverses the obstacles, repels the monster's attacks, and stealthily avoids Apep to reach the hall of Ma'at, goddess of truth and justice. Here, Ani faces his final challenge. He is judged by 42 assessor gods, who must be convinced that he has lived a righteous life.
Note the idea of a Muslim culture of 42 virgins. There's a direct reference here too.
Among these negative confessions or declarations of innocence, he proclaims that he has not made anyone cry, is not an eavesdropper, and has not polluted the water. But did Ani really live such a perfect life? Not quite. But that's where the heart scarab amulet comes in. It's inscribed with the words, "Do not stand as a witness against him," precisely so Ani's heart doesn't betray him by recalling the time he listened to his neighbor's fight or washed his feet.
Note in the United States, we have the Fifth Amendment,
Now
so you do
it's
not
Ani's
have to
moment of
testify
truth,
against
the
yourself
weighing of
in
the
a
heart.
court of law.
If his
Basically
heart
the
is
same
heavier
concept.
than feather, weighed down by Ani's wrongdoings, it'll be devoured by the monstrous Amit, part crocodile, part leopard, part hippopotamus.
And in
And
some
Ani
versions
will
it's
cease
lion,
to
in some other
exist
versions it's
forever.
leopard.
But Ani is in luck. His heart is judged pure. Ra, the sun god, takes him to Osiris, god of the underworld, who gives him final approval to enter the afterlife. In the endless and lush field of reeds, Ani meets his deceased parents. Here there is no sadness, pain, or anger, but there is work to be done. Like everyone else, Ani must cultivate a plot of land, which he does with the help of a Shabti doll that had been placed in his tomb.
Those are those little
Today,
figures
the
we saw
papyrus
within
of
the cave.
Ani resides in the British Museum, where it has been since 1888. Only Ani, if anyone, knows what really happened after his death. But thanks to his Book of the Dead, we can imagine him happily tending his crops for all eternity.
And so as we look at the mummies, one of the reasons we need the color variation is that when we actually put your body through natron, and they're a darker skinned individual, of course they're Egyptians, they're North Africans, is that your body color actually changes. So from whatever color it is, the longer the natron is put on you, the longer, and that's that radioactive salt that is actually used, that the Osiris is sitting on basically a lake that comes out of naturally occurring oases called wadi, actually in different parts of Egypt, so way out in the desert. When they do that, if they leave the salt on just for a few days or a couple of weeks, you get this greenish hue. But the longer it's left on, and if it's left on for as far as 2 months, it will actually turn your body black. And so you'll see in mummies that the way to tell gender, because they have to remove the breast, because that is fat, otherwise there's rot and muscle. They have to remove all of that. So it's really hard to tell gender in a mummy, because everything becomes desiccated and dried out, because your body is 72% water. The whole goal is to dry it out and to get out all of the nastiness that otherwise could be eaten by bacteria. Otherwise you start literally decomposing within 72 hours of your death. So we get rid of all of that as fast as we possibly can. Within that process, we need a way of determining male versus female. Male are painted red, women are painted yellow. So here's the mummification process, but a very good TED Talk that goes through the same process.
Death and taxes are famously inevitable. But what about decomposition? As anyone who's seen a mummy knows, ancient Egyptians went to a lot of trouble to evade decomposition. So how successful were they? Living cells constantly renew themselves. Specialized enzymes decompose old structures, and the raw materials are used to build new ones. But what happens when someone dies? Their dead cells are no longer able to renew themselves, but the enzymes keep breaking everything down. So anyone looking to preserve a body needed to get ahead of those enzymes before the tissues began to rot. Neurons die quickly, so brains were a lost cause to ancient Egyptian mummifiers, which is why, according to Greek historian Herodotus, they started the process by hammering a spike into the skull, mashing up the brain, flushing it out the nose, and pouring tree resins into the skull to prevent further decomposition. Brains may decay first, but decaying guts are much worse. The liver, stomach, and intestines contain digestive enzymes and bacteria, which, upon death, start eating the corpse from the inside. So the priest removed the lungs and abdominal organs first. It was difficult to remove the lungs without damaging the heart, but because the heart was believed to be the seat of the soul, they treated it with special care. They placed the visceral organs in jars filled with a naturally occurring salt called natron. Like any salt, natron can prevent decay by killing bacteria and preventing the body's natural digestive enzymes from working. But natron isn't just any salt. It's mainly a mixture of two alkaline salts, soda ash and baking soda. Alkaline salts are especially deadly to bacteria, and they can turn fatty membranes into a hard, soapy substance, thereby maintaining the corpse's structure. After dealing with the internal organs, the priest stuffed the body cavity with sacks of more natron and washed it clean to disinfect the skin. Then, the corpse was set in a bed of still more natron for about 35 days to preserve its outer flesh. By the time of its removal, the alkaline salts had sucked the fluid from the body and formed hard brown clumps. The corpse wasn't putrid, but it didn't exactly smell good either. So priests poured tree resin over the body to seal it, massaged it with a waxy mixture that included cedar oil, and then wrapped it in linen. Finally, they placed the mummy in a series of nested coffins, and sometimes even a stone sarcophagus. So how successful were the ancient Egyptians at evading decay? On one hand, mummies are definitely not intact human bodies. Their brains have been mashed up and flushed out. Their organs have been removed and salted like salami. And about half of their remaining body mass has been drained away. Still, what remains is amazingly well preserved. Even after thousands of years, scientists can perform autopsies on mummies to determine their causes of death, and possibly even isolate DNA samples. This has given us new information. For example, it seems that air pollution was a serious problem in ancient Egypt, probably because of indoor fires used to bake bread. Cardiovascular disease was also common, as was tuberculosis. So ancient Egyptians were somewhat successful in evading decay. Still, like death, taxes are inevitable. When some mummies were transported, they were taxed as salted fish.
And one of the most unpleasant jobs that in the ancient world is that after those brains get mashed up, someone has to make sure that all the brains come out. And so one of the things that they do is they would pour in a slight acid that would liquefy the rest of the brains. And you think your job is bad. Someone had to suck that up. Now, again, they did not have to drink it, but they could just spit it out on the floor. But that's radioactive natron, this naturally occurring salt, acid water that they're washing out with brain juice all in it. Welcome to breakfast. So with this, we can even now reconstitute and actually find out why certain pharaohs have died. And so here's King Tut. I can move mine out of the way here. There we go. King Tut's reconstructed face. So here's the mummy. You can see the little touches of red that are still on it for a masculine mummy. Here's what he would have looked like in real life. And we now can tell he was actually suffering from both malaria and he actually has a piercing in the head. We don't actually know which one killed him. He died about 19 to 20. We can now identify that. So if you look at Mesopotamia versus the Egyptian art, we can note how similar they are. So if we compare the two from 3D sculptures, these are the statues that show up from the temple of Eshnunua. And remember, these are the votive statues. So you can see how closely resemble they are with Egypt with more realism. When we look at profile images in those narrative registers, we can look at how common and close they are. And even at temples, remember we saw the stepped temple of Djoser, which leads us to the larger religious architecture. You know, we can say, all right, well, the material is different. The material is what happens to be at hand, whether it happens to be rock encasing mud or whether they have just enough rock to do large-scale temples and the pyramids themselves. And there's a good size of how large the pyramids would have been. So why did they borrow so much information? Well, here's the question. Why in the United States, or why around the world do people want to be like us? Why do people want McDonald's? Why do they want Walmart? Why do they want Holiday Inn? Because we are the dominant civilization on earth, both as a consumer, but also we have done better celebrating and showing off the American dream than almost any other culture in human history. Maybe outside of the Roman Empire, where it was good to be Roman and they had an influx of immigrants, kind of like what we have had within the process. Ancient Egypt saw Mesopotamia, that parent culture 400 years before, as that dominant culture. So they based a lot of what they did on that dominant culture and then made changes to show, oh, we're better than that. Look, our pyramids are more firm. Our policies are more fair because if you're good, you get a good afterlife. If you're bad, you actually get punished, unlike the Egyptians. But a fair amount of the way their art looks and functions is actually borrowed. That's why we call it Egyptian culture, Mesopotamia 2.0. And so one thing you'll have to do be able to do on your midterm is to be able to identify unknown artworks. So if we base upon the aesthetic features alone for the artwork on the left, is this image more likely Mesopotamia or Egyptian? Use visual evidence to make your case. Now you had a reading about this, so you already know the correct answer, but I'm not caring about the correct answer because you could still have the correct answer and fail this particular task, or you get the wrong answer and still get an A. Because what it's asking you to do is use the visual evidence to tell me what are the features of Mesopotamia on here on this artwork versus what are the features that are Egyptian. And if the features are both, then it doesn't matter giving you the idea of which unknown it's from. It's really the ones that show up that are different, that are just Mesopotamian features or just Egyptian features. And I'll give you a minute to look over this. And then by features alone, this is slightly Mesopotamian, slightly. But it also has almost all the Egyptian features, including the more naturalistic, realistic body, the more drawn hieroglyphic type images, even though it's cuneiform script. And that's because this is a difficult one. This is an artwork that actually is from the middle region. Remember, Mesopotamia and Egypt are constantly battling back and forth for different aspects of control. And this comes from a particular area that at some points was dominated by the Egyptians, and other points dominated by the Mesopotamians. And so you get features of both within this realm. We can do the same thing with this feature. And again, you had a reading about this, so you should be able to tell me from the reading what it is. But if you look at the features are largely Mesopotamian and don't look that Egyptian. There are some things. This is the odd Egyptian artwork from the Amarna period. And so this is Akhenaten and his son, and that is actually King Tut, actually right there. And so he changed the religion of his ancestors. And when King Tut got older, he changed back because not just the art style, but if it was continuous and great and a wonderful civilization that the gods were supporting for the last 2,000 years, why would you ever change to worship the sun disk Aten versus some of the other gods and all the other gods that were there? So we do have some features that we can look at. So for your midterm, make sure you can identify the features that are specifically Egyptian versus Mesopotamian. Now, the last activity that we're going to do is this. And I want to give you an opportunity of doing what I do with Disney and other movie sets at Universal, Marvel. It's a career opportunity in the arts. So to be a cultural consultant, basically what this is you are going to have to identify what this particular music video does very well, what they do, but it's not problematic, it's not offensive to their gods. And then what would be problematic for their gods today? Like, for example, let's pretend that we are going to make a video and we're going to use the crucifixion of Jesus. Now, that crucifixion of Jesus better not show off in most capacities as a comedy unless we are trying to piss off a lot of Christians that happen to be out there, right? The death of Christ in particular is a very somber, brutal, horrific image that shows up. And so we probably want to handle that with some grains of salt, with some tact within the process, even if we make fun of other images. We have to do the same thing for other cultures. And so that's what we're looking at in terms of doing this. So we're going to consider both the visual look aesthetics and the concepts underlying these images. So you'll need to make 3 columns. Things that the video does well. Column number 2. Things the video got wrong. And column number 3. Things the video got wrong that are probably offensive and that we should go back and fix. And so here's Katy Perry's Dark Horse video. Remember, write those 3 columns down. So what a cultural consultant does then is actually come up with those 3 columns and suggest things that they should change, things that they really do need to change, so it doesn't bother people from other cultures or even from our own culture that want things to be more historically accurate to actually increase their sales. The more time that a company spends in their prep work getting these things ready, and so that's why most movies that deal with cultures today, whether it's Black Panther and dealing with a kind of a mythical Afrofuturist empire, or Moana dealing with Oceanic and Polynesian cultures, they generally will have a team of cultural consultants. These cultural consultants it's a pretty good job. They pay between about $100 to $200 an hour, depending upon how far along you are. And most of them actually do it as part-time. There are very few people who do this as full-time work. And so the last thing we'll do in class, and I'll let you and leave you to do this on your own, is that challenge A to Z. Can you think of an artwork, a personality, an invention, or an aesthetic from each letter of the alphabet about Egypt? If you don't want to do that, then here we go. Okay, folks, that's a wrap from the mummy culture that shows up. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day, and I hope that everything goes well for you. If you have any questions, let me know. And remember also that in our Blackboard assignment sheet, if you look under Egypt, there's always a top 10 list that another honor student has actually created that summarizes basically the most important 10 concepts from ancient Egypt that's always available for you. There's one for Mesopotamia, there'll be one for Greece, for Rome, and so this is something that's always there. Have a wonderful day. Bye.